Welcome to the Satluj TV News Special. So in our series of interviews examining the many issues affecting the global Sikh community, we've naturally tended to focus on the views and opinions from those within the community itself, and particularly from a US and British perspective. But our guest today is here to give a different perspective, that from the heart of Europe. Gunther Fehlinger is an Austrian politician and economist, and with a long and illustrious career as a development and investment consultant, his profession has seen him taking senior roles in several high-profile European organisations, promoting business, investment and innovation across the region. He's a passionate advocate of NATO and the European Union, and during his time he has had a particular focus on the Balkans and the Ukraine. And it was during this experience where he gained hugely valuable insight into the political machinations that saw both the breakup of former Yugoslavia but also the emergence of several new independent nations. So in light of that, several months ago, Gunther ignited social media when he called for the breakup of India, amongst other nations. And it's this wealth of experience and knowledge that we're hoping to tap into today. Gunther Fehlinger, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks a lot for this invitation. I'm very honored to be here.
It's a pleasure. Well, Gunther, I'd like to start, if I may, with a simple and I guess a fairly big question, looking at the macro, the big picture to start with. I referred in the introduction to 5 months ago when you called for the breakup of the BRICS economies and in particular India. Why? Why did you call for that?
You know, this was in the context of the BRICS summit, where unfortunately this really tragic community of incompetent world leaders who are aligned with Russia, who is doing a genocidal war against Ukraine today, and they have, as if nothing happened, as if nothing would happen in Ukraine, and they have aligned with Russia during wartime. And that was the point where I said that's the point of no return for South Africa, for India, because if you do such a form of cozying up to a bloody dictator like Putin, then we have to question the whole concept of India, of South Africa, and of our allies in BRICS, because they have really lost the legitimacy to be on the global stage, representing their countries. And then I started to discuss what is exactly wrong in India. And then I discovered a lot of things are wrong in India. And we have had a very naive view of India in the last years. And I'm grateful for also the lot of input of the Sikh community to also enlighten the European public about the massive human rights abuses and the lack of governance in India, because this kind of moral superiority with which Modi presents himself as the kind of nice grandfather of the world politics, in reality, he's putting all his efforts to sustain the Russian war machine. And this is really disgraceful. And that's why I started this campaign against all the BRICS members, but in particular against India.
But India has had, I guess, a very traditional and very historic relationship with Moscow, certainly going back decades. And I know that India was funded by Moscow, even back to the days of Gandhi in the 1980s. And of course, there is this, they call it the I2RC alliance, India, Iran, Russia, China. In the context of that, and in the context of what you've been talking about, it's a question that I often ask is, do we in the West, and can we in the West, and particularly the European Union as an example, can we see India as an ally?
Look, I thought so until 2022. And I was very, very nice to India. I proposed to India for India to have a UN Security Council seat with veto power instead of Russia. Because India obviously has all the rights. It's 10 times more population than Russia. It's also a nuclear power. So let's have India such a Security Council seat. Invite India to the OECD of the developed countries, and let's have a free trade agreement. That was my opinion until 2022, and I still promoted that until the BRICS summit. But I discovered the reality of India is not my naive belief that we have treated India incorrectly, and so they have some kind of grievance against us, and we just have to treat India better and everything will be fine. No, you know, we are not the West of the colonial times, We are the free market economies, the democratic world, and we are calling the Indian people, and they have not responded. They stayed with the dictatorship of Putin, and they have funded it. They're taking advantage of this war, and they are delivering weapons, and they are also taking oil out of Russia. And that's because of some kind of misconception of what's going on. What's going on is genocide in Ukraine, and they cannot stick with this Russian war machine. And they do, and then we really have to discuss deeper what is wrong there. If they think they are still in the 1970s in the Cold War, then this present leadership must be changed. Yeah? If they think that we are the imperialists of the West, then there are some kind of socialist ideologues there, and that's also wrong. And if they think that we are somehow fools and we cannot see behind the facade of Mr. Modi, then I think they are also very mistaken. And they are basically a leftover of the British Empire, because this Indian continent was never really united before the British united it by force. And so ultimately it's a leftover of the British Empire, and it seems not to work for the Indian people. And it's definitely not working for a world global community. They have made their choice in this 2 years, and they have made the wrong choice. And that's why either it is really transforming in a market democracy, a lot according to federal lines, like, for example, the United States of America, or we have to encourage the secession and the division of India, similar like the British Empire itself, in the form of decolonization. So basically what we can say, the longer I think about it, the clearer it gets, that India today is a leftover of the British Empire, just a little bit browner version, but more socialist and more dictatorial. And so ultimately, similar like the British Empire has been dismantled and dissolved, mainly by American efforts and American leadership after World War II. So it must be that this leftover of the British Empire called India today is also a kind of prison of nations, like similar like Austria was in the 19th century and the Soviet Union and Russia is today. So India, seen as a prison of nation, mean there can be easily 17 or 20 new states. I don't say necessarily this must happen. It's also a chance for India to reform herself and to be a decent part of the global community and the free world. But if they don't want, we are very justified as activists in Europe to call for a change of governance. And then Khalistan and many other states are really, they can emerge in many exactly the same way, like, for example, Zimbabwe or let's say Egypt or let's say India itself has emerged out of the British Empire. And Mr. Modi is running his India seemingly very much along these lines. And so I say, why not have a country like Croatia developing, a country like Kosovo developing, like Slovakia? There will be so many new states, and I think all of them will have a very good economic viability politically. And so that's a much better scenario than having a Russian ally somehow stuck in a long gone past, mismanaging his own population and contributing to world disorder.
I think I'll pick up on a word that you used earlier, which is the word naive. And I think this is interesting because it reflects even my own attitude towards India. I've always been a huge India-phile. It's a fascinating country. It contains a huge diversity of cultures and history. But as we've seen, as you peel back the layers of India, the more layers you unpeel, the more uncomfortable, like yourself, I've become when you see actually what has happened in over decades. And as you say, the British did indeed unite India by force, and they handed it over to the next administration, who have continued to unite it. Would you say, in your opinion, that India is a democracy? Narendra Modi bestrides the world stage in front of world leaders. He shakes their hands in front of smiling faces and cameras, saying, I lead the world's largest democracy. They have votes, they have elections like any other democratic nation. Do you not think India is, as it stands, a democracy in the traditional sense of the word?
Look, there is always a question about the degree of democracy. I think we have to concede that India is, of course, a democracy more similar to Russia. Russia is also a democracy in a sense, yeah. But obviously everybody knows that Putin is manipulating the election, controls the media, threatens the opposition, and so on and so on. But India is going in that direction of the Russian democracy, and that's very bad. And they are also threatening the opposition. There's violence and intimidation. There's, of course, a lot of injustice in the electoral and in the media access system and in the economic system. A lot of typical kind of oligarchic system where the control of the key resources in the state and in the media and in the economy is, of course, in the hand of the few. And they are then politically controlled. So this is not what we call a modern federal market-based democracy, because there you need competition, you need control, you need also some kind of diversity, and you need also some change. And especially what Modi has done now with his nationalist party, BJP, it is not exactly what I call a working federal democratic system where there is or a competitive possibility for change. On the contrary, it's more and more going into the Putin's direction, and that he seems to love this kind of paternalistic, kleptocratic control mechanism, and he is learning from that side. And so the claim that India is large, obviously it's the largest state in the world in terms of population. And let's be very clear, I'm very positive about all people living in India. We have really no grievances against the Indians. Yeah, they can come here. We want to trade. We want to have fairness. And I wish the very best for all people there. But the system has to be really reformed. And if it's not possible to reform, then the breakup of India is a very likely scenario. Not because I want it or we in Europe discuss about it, because simply the people of India don't want to live in such misery and such abuse and in that kind of system where they have no kind of rights and no kind of say about their future, where one group is played off against the other and there is no kind of multi-ethnic interreligious harmony, but just the dominance of one group of the others. Yeah? And this is not democracy. This is a persiflage of democracy. And this we have to discuss in the coming decade very intensively with the Indian public and the civil society, because either you really transform or you have no future as a national state on the world stage. And then we definitely cannot give you any kind of further steps forward towards having a say on the global level in terms of veto power, because we have enough problems with Russia and China already. And such an India we really don't need at the UN Security Council.
Well, of course, India have got elections coming up this year, and according to all the expectations and polls, it is likely that the BJP will win another term. So we will get another 4 or 5 years in Narendra Modi. Is that something we should fear? Where do you think Modi could take this next? What do you think his next steps will be?
Look, all the things in the world now depend on the outcome of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Because if Russia wins, Modi will even further go into the Putin direction. He will be the Putin of India. There's no doubt. If Putin loses in Ukraine, which I hope, and I think it will happen very soon, and he will have a major defeat, obviously all these bizarre world leaders of some semi-authoritarian states, also like Turkey, for example, South Africa, they will think twice to align with Putin, and they will be much softer back home because they will see that Putin's way has led to complete disaster for him. So it all depends on that. But, you know, of course, he has also his internal mechanism of power, which he will try to keep, obviously. And so I think there is also a major effort of the global community to be done to discuss with the Indian systems in terms of the national minorities, the religious minorities, the federal states. Yeah, we have to stop to see India as a kind of unitary state where you call one guy and then you meet and that's it. But we have to work much more with the regions, with all the federal capitals in India. And then we have to tell them that there is a better world outside possible and that we are actually very pro-Indian if India is pro-free world. But I think the reality in the next decade in terms of Indian policy is Modi. And I can just appeal to him and to the people listening here that he will be hopefully not going the full Putin, because it's a way towards disaster, and it will be seen very visible in the year 2024, because Russia is already crumbling. And if he wants to go the Russian way, then it's certainly the end of the Indian Empire as well.
Do you think the way to deal with India, I mean, if we look forward, we obviously will have many more years potentially of Narendra Modi. And any breakup of India, if it was to come, is certainly quite a number of years away. It's likely in any optimistic event. How do you think the world should and could deal with India as a nation? I mean, it is a huge market. It's 1.4 billion people. It's the most populous country on the planet. It's a very enticing friend for many nations, commercially speaking. But do we need to adopt a carrot or stick, or a carrot and stick approach to India? I mean, for example, we can sanction them, we can boycott them, but as we've seen in Russia and Iran, the irony of that is it always actually works. It's the law of unintended consequences. Russia and Iran have learnt to become self-dependent. They've developed their own capabilities to function as nations. So it's not necessarily the way forward. But how do you think the West, Europe, and even the rest of the world, the alliances, how can we deal with China going forward? Is it carrot or is it stick or is it both?
You mean now how we can deal with China or India?
Sorry, India. This is India I'm talking about.
India. So, India has not attacked anybody. It's not an aggressive nation towards external powers. So there is no need to sanction India at this time. I'm not calling for that. And also the situation is with Iran and Russia. They might seem to be capable in industrial warfare at the moment because of some drones and so. But given the enormous natural resources of Iran and Russia, which are probably the most resource richest, and also in terms of culture, they have a long tradition, actually compared to where they could be. They are extremely poor countries. You can always steal from the most part of the population, and then you can fund some kind of technology in the weapons sector. That's what authoritarian states do. But don't be blinded by the fact Russia is now the second year and soon the third year under sanctions, seriously, and since 2013 some, and they are already crumbling. And Iran is on the brink. The Iranian people are in constant protest since 2007 or 9. Constantly they are on the street trying to get rid of that regime. The Russians are since 2012 basically constantly under protest, and they are really a lot of people, are protesting in Russia. You remember the White Russian Revolution and all these things. They have not been successful because these resource-richest countries, they can, of course, buy a certain population to suppress the rest. And then they can intimidate the potential leaders by, for example, shooting them, like Mr. Nemtsov, or imprisoning them, like Navalny. And the Iranians are also very infamous in the world for killing the opposition. Of course, this all has not in that extent happened in India. So towards India, we should definitely go into the direction of trying both sides. This is, basically integrating India further in the world economy and giving India a chance to be fully part of the free world. That means a free trade agreement with the European Union, membership in OECD, potentially the UN Security Council seat, if India also joins OECD and leaves BRICS. This is the priority. This is the direction. And so we make this offer towards India. But if India then fails and sticks with the axis of evil, and then, of course, they made their choice. And the consequences are that we continuously will work with the opposition and the regional minorities and also the regional governments to change India towards federal state, or see also the opportunities, which is not the state policy of the European Union or NATO, obviously. Just don't get me wrong. But I think it's absolutely enticing to discuss with the Sikhs and with others the opportunities. If not, Yugoslavia, for example, is a role model. It was also a very strong state at one moment, and suddenly it was no longer. The Soviet Union as well. So this we have in history the British Empire, the French Empire. All these things have happened in the history. And if there is a strong unity of the people of Khalistan and other regions in India to go for independence, then of course they have to prepare themselves, show the world community that they will be a good state, yeah, aspire to be governed like a Council of Europe nation, to be on international standards of democracy, and work in that direction. And so the world, there's nothing dangerous in a splintering of India in various new states. It's something completely normal, and you need to build a coalition of regions who want to be free inside India, and you make a council of the free nations of India, and then you say the future is bright. We will also do some kind of European Union style unification afterwards. Why not? So that's absolutely possible. The new 15 or 20 states of India can then form some common market, can do some political unification process, but as sovereign states. That's also absolutely possible. Why not? Many of the European member states, they have been once member together with India of the British Empire. For example, Malta, for example, Cyprus, Ireland at one stage. Yeah, there is many examples of states who then have been independent, got the independence, and then they have reunited in a political project like the European Union and NATO. So this is absolutely possible. And then you have to show the world that you are capable of governing your states alone. And that's very, very positive and good. And so we should not be afraid of independence of Khalistan. But we, of course, have to work with the people there that this will be a positive contribution to world peace and world prosperity.
Well, if I can maybe put a contrary opinion to that, I'm curious because breaking up India as it stands is a powerhouse in the Indian Ocean region. It forms some form of buttress, shall we say, against China, an increasingly belligerent China. If we are encouraging the breakup of that united in political terms, nation, are we not creating potential instability in the region? There is this, of course, there's the ideological idea that, yes, they can reunite in some form of union again. But ultimately, is that as strong as India as it stands today? And by breaking it up, are we not creating a potential situation of instability with, of course, unknown consequences?
Sure, there is, of course, the instability and insecurity in every change of the global order. But, let me maybe correct one of the terminology here. Nobody is breaking up anybody. It's not Europe or America or the UK breaking up the India. No. Nations and empires, they dissolve themselves by their inner inconsistencies and by the lack of the will of the constituent people to work together. This is what happens when, for example, the Ottoman Empire, the Austrian Empire, the Soviet Union, nobody, not Ronald Reagan or George Bush, have designed the breakup of the Soviet Union. It was the Ukrainians who wanted to go. It was the Georgians who wanted to leave. Yeah, this is the truth. And also when it comes to the Czechoslovaks from Austria, for example, they wanted to leave. Yeah, from Egypt wanted to leave the British Empire. It was the India who wanted to leave the British Empire. It was not Churchill who encouraged them to go, or other Attlee or others. Yeah. So ultimately, this is the thing. It's not us breaking up India. It's India breaking up by its own inconsistencies and the lack of the will of the people there living together and working together. And in order to not have instability, I would recommend a process like we have it in the Soviet Union or in ex-Yugoslavia. You have instability if you don't organize the cooperation of the states. Yeah. But we learned out of the crises of ex-Yugoslavia a lot, and we built many institutions for regional cooperation, the OECD, the Council of Europe, and India would have to build similar institutions of regional cooperation. And I think there's not a lot of animosity with many of the states among each other. So I don't see massive civil wars according to the borders, or it's like the massive issues. There will be some, maybe. I don't know how much antagonism and animosity there is. Yeah. And of course, we have all the mechanisms to help if there is a wish to help in such a process. And that's, of course, there is a risk. But the thing that China would suddenly send ships towards India and take over parts of India, that's a bit ridiculous. Yeah? They will, of course, economically exploit that. They will, of course, also try to have maybe partners then, which they are already trying everywhere. But they have many problems in China internally. They will also have many minorities they have which want to break away from Nepal to Xinjiang to the Mongolian parts, the Manchuria. The Chinese are the very much the country which is very interested in the unity of India and of Russia, because everybody would logically concede if Russia is now breaking up, India is breaking up, then of course China would be the next. So they will be the first one to somehow work with the Indian leadership not to go into that direction. So the danger of complete instability in the Indian Ocean is not there. And of course, there is always the relation with Pakistan, but also Pakistan, to my view, honestly, when I look at Pakistan, there's a lot of internal inconsistencies and injustice in Pakistan. So there will be a lot of people getting the idea that also it would be much better to have some parts of Pakistan in our federal system, or also to have changes in the structure of Pakistan. So it's not exactly that the Pakistani would suddenly take over or attack India. No, I don't think that will be happening. And I cannot counsel them anything like that. So don't worry, it will be just fine. But the most likely scenario is also that India is a little bit more going into the direction of freedom. And this would be also my first recommendation before you decide about complete breakup, to see if India can be still saved as a free, federal, democratic country.
And those who govern India, let's call them the ruling class, they have obviously resisted with force, literal force, any talk of secessionism, any talk of self-determination within the Punjab. Over decades, there have been genocides. It's a terrible, terrible history where the Sikhs have demanded self-determination. But this, of course, has been met by central government brute force. They've literally sent in the army. So is it naive to think, to start with, that Khalistan, the establishment of Khalistan, would be a relatively civil, benign process? Because, of course, the Indian government, they realise it will be a stack of dominoes. Once Khalistan goes, it's very likely that other regions, for example, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Manipur, wherever, these other nations might think, actually, we want independence too. So it might start that chain of events. So it's very likely, do you think, that the Indian government will literally fight with arms and ammunition to prevent even the first stages? We are seeing that, where they declare any activist as a terrorist. Just point blank, anybody who campaigns for Khalistan is a terrorist. That's quite an obstacle to overcome.
Sure. The main thing is obviously here that we work systematically. And I can just recommend you the experience of the so-called Forum of the Free Nations of Russia. So you need not to focus only on Khalistan. And this is leading in a dead-end street. Yeah? What you need is to need partners in every federal state of India today, in every region of India. And there are so many of them who are unsatisfied with the current setup. So you need a forum of all the regions and minorities of India and work with them systematically. And then you need to agree for a certain point, let's say 2026, 2-3 years from now, that there are consistent independent movements who are coordinated and who are then promoting the independence of all regions of India together simultaneously, and that you propose also a European Union kind of style unification process after you have independence, and also some kind of defense alliance like NATO for the Indian continent and the ex-members of ex-India. And this ex-India strategy must be smart and must be also inclusive. So if you have something to offer for the world, and this is civil war, nuclear disaster, complete breakdown of the public order in India, that's a no-go. Nobody will support you. And it's also not something you should aspire, because that's quite a terrible scenario if that's an offer for the future. If you offer, on the contrary, a European unification program for the Indian subcontinent, a defense alliance according to the NATO standards, if you say a Council of Europe, a Council of India, where all the states are having a human rights court and there's a unification, the same like we had it. Actually, let's never forget, Europe was a terrible divided continent. Europe comes from imperial past. Europe comes from socialist past, the East. Yeah? Europe comes from nationalist, socialist past, the Nazi parts of Europe, Germany, Austria, and so much was conquered by them in the 40s. So we have a terrible history. We just developed our mechanisms after the war, and we all have a reason. The Council of Europe, which is human rights and democracies and electoral systems first, yeah. Then the economic unification process, which has led to currency and political unification in the European Union. Then we have NATO as a defense alliance to agree that we don't want to have wars between us anymore, that we are all Western democracies and we defend each other together. We don't go into wars against each other and anywhere as a NATO. And so these are the ways we have stabilized the most bloody continent of the world history, which is Europe, actually. We have the most tragic part in world history, and we have done very, very terrible things against India, against Africa, against ourselves as well. And we have then built the institution. So if you come up with this kind of institutional framework, if you say that this is the future we want, a European future for India in terms of institutional cooperation of new independent states, then this will not be the recipe for civil war and breakdown of order, but it will be much higher level of prosperity. Because don't forget, India is still a very poor country. When you see GDP per capita, India is far below the global average, which China has now reached. Yeah, you are basically in India, you are on the level of 20 or 30% of the global average. Yeah, so you could be minimum. You should be today already about 4 times richer under normal circumstances. And this would be easy to achieve, actually, with just decent democracy and market standards, which we anyhow offer to you, and which you would have to also work on if you aspire to be part of the free world in the Organization for Economic Cooperation, OECD, or with a free trade agreement. And you would live much better under such circumstances. Everybody would live much better in India under such circumstances. But your socialist, nationalistic kind of government, with socialist economics of the Congress and nationalism of the BJP the last years has not led to prosperity, yeah? Given your potential. It is now some sky. I'm sure you have nice buildings now in many of the cities, skyscrapers and good infrastructure. But compared to your population, you are relatively a disaster still. And this could be changed easily with some better policy. And this is what I would wish for India.
Yeah, no, I think the polarization of society in India is actually quite shocking. And I think you hit the nail on the head with the per capita GDP. Yeah, it is. It's overtaken Great Britain as now the 5th largest economy in the world. But as you say, per capita, it actually ranks a long way down, which is quite a sad indictment of what it potentially could be as a region. Of course, a lot of these suggestions that you're putting forward are all on the assumption that we can get to that position of independent states, of independent nations, of Khalistan and the others. When we look at the mechanisms to get to that point, because of course it's a very long road to get to that point, it does take an awful lot of very complex and difficult steps to get to that point. So if we look at the actual process of that, the actual mechanism to get there, at the moment, obviously there is the Khalistan referendum that's rolling out across the world, across the Sikh diaspora. And at the moment, that's been hugely well attended. Hundreds of thousands of Sikhs across the US, Canada, the UK, Europe have been coming out to vote. And it looks like a vast majority in favour of Khalistan. And of course, the next obvious step is to roll that out in the Punjab itself, of 20, 30 million people in the Punjab, to give them that democratic voice. Now, of course, Narendra Modi presumably is going to say, no chance, you are not holding that referendum, for all the reasons that we know. What on earth can the West do, the European Union, the West? What can we do to help this democratic movement pressure India into holding that democratic referendum in Punjab? Is there anything that we can do from the outside?
Look, it's not so easy, but there are many encouraging examples. Yeah? Look at the freedom of Montenegro, or freedom of Croatia, freedom of Kosovo, freedom of Macedonia. So there's many examples. Also Georgia, Estonia. So the thing is really to develop some mechanism which is able to convince world opinion that the new states will work. This is very important. Yeah. So don't use violence. Don't use terrorism. Don't use this mechanism which makes the world opinion go away, basically, and distance herself from such mechanisms. Because if you have a good case and if you believe in your own freedom, you will convince by basically peaceful means. And there's a good Indian tradition on that one. Yeah, in history, you got your independence. India got the independence from the British Empire, basically by this very much peaceful demonstrations. Wherever, there was ultimately then a lot of violence in the breakup of India, in the division wars, and so let's not forget that. So if you can prepare it a little bit better, it would be really, really very much easier to convince the world opinion that Khalistan's case is fair. And I repeat myself, you need to build it not only on Khalistan, you need to get all the regions behind it, and you need a basic dissolving internal dissolution process, which is very similar to what the Soviet Union has undergone in the year 1991. And this is the way to do it, yeah. And I'm confident that this doesn't need a lot of time. You just need the coalition partners and the consensus of all regions of India, that individually they will be much better off than in this kind of imperial construct of Mr. Modi.
The problem that I guess that India has as a nation that comes up time and time again is its freedom of expression, its freedom of speech, the press, the media. It ranks in the global index of free press. I think it's 161st out of 180 countries. It's only just above North Korea in terms of a free press. For a democratic nation, that's a shocking statistic. So, of course, the Indian population are kept very much in the dark about the bigger picture, about the potential of what it could be. As you said before, most of the Indian population are trapped in this prison of poverty. All they're thinking about is, where is my next meal coming from? And how can I feed the family? And of course, the media, if they are exposed to the media, that media is tightly controlled by, of course, central government. What can we do in the West to change that? Is the pressure that we can apply? What can we do to bring this message of, frankly, you are better off as independent nations? How can that message get through to the people in the street?
No, that's not so easy, obviously, but I see the Sikh community is already doing a good job and convincing a lot of opinion makers in Canada, UK, and in the US and in the European Union that there is a very, very specific issue and a problem in Indian government and governance, and that's already a success. Yeah? I see it also when you look around. Before the war started fully in 2022, there was a certain lack of interest in the case of minorities and the destiny of minorities in India. But now, Modi is getting more and more isolated. And I think the minorities in India get more and more international exposure, especially after this terrible murder of the opposition leader in Canada and the consequent political discussion in Canada. And so this case has reached to a public opinion. And many opinion leaders in Europe and the West are doing their best to somehow make a case as well for the freedom of the minorities of inside India. And, everything, of course, depends on the success of the movement for the freedom of the Russian nations. Because here, of course, it's the biggest aggression, disaster and tyranny, autocracy. And if Russia now breaks up, which I will calculate will happen rather speedily and surprisingly fast, then, of course, everybody in the world who is suppressed and who has a case to make will see the example of Russia, and then it will be the role model for the breakup and the dismantlement of many of the empires, especially India. But also there's the case to be made in the case of South Africa and others who are the allies of Russia in this terrible war.
And there is an interesting parallel with Russia, of course, with this transnational repression. And of course, we've seen the murder, the outrageous, overt murder of a Khalistani campaigner in Canada. And then the US recently also thwarted an assassination attempt of another campaigner in New York. Again, a US citizen on US soil. And of course, that sort of echoes Russia's old tactics of killing dissidents on foreign soil, particularly in the UK. We've had recent examples of that. It's pretty outrageous of a so-called democracy to be killing political opponents on foreign soil. I mean, I'm surprised that there hasn't been a bigger reaction. I mean, I'll give an example. I mean, just this week, the US has just agreed a deal, an arms deal with India of $4 billion to sell drones, missiles, planes, military assistance, basically, worth $4 billion. Now, the deal was held up for a few days by the Foreign Affairs Committee, who said, hang on a second, you know, we've just thwarted an assassination attempt by India of one of our citizens, but realpolitik kicked in, the old commercial elements kicked in, so this is a $4 billion deal. There's almost this two-tier treatment, this two-tier diplomacy with India, where on the face of it, it's smiling faces in front of the camera. There's the quiet words, between the leaders when Modi visited Joe Biden last year. Obviously, these issues are raised, but ultimately, an arms trade deal has gone through. So there seems to be a lot of hypocrisy going on here, and the common person, and particularly the Sikh community, are outraged that all these leaders of democratic nations are smiling and shaking the hands of Narendra Modi, whilst Narendra Modi is killing British citizens, US citizens, Canadian citizens. It's only a matter of time potentially before it happens on the European continent. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's an outrage. It's an outrage. And the lack of values in our foreign policy has led us immediately, absolutely directly, into this crisis and the war. Because we have gone into exactly that appeasement, realpolitik with Putin. Yeah. We've gone with Putin and with China in the last 25 years. Yeah, the rise of both nations after the year 2000, and it was in a way convenient, because there was the 2001 9/11, and then there was the focus, the war against terror, and then China seemed to be less of a threat, and Russia was offering some help. And so the West was a little bit complacent and said, let's look away. I mean, from the start, Russian imperialism, Putin's rise to power, was built on the blood and the destruction of Chechnya. Chechnya was de facto independent country, not recognized, but they had their own freedom and own government from the year 94 to 99 until Putin invaded in October 99 and destroyed the city and killed hundreds and thousands of people and destroyed all the resistance. And that was the reality. So from the beginning, we could have seen that he is a mass murderer and he's a genocidal guy, but we didn't do that. We thought it's good to have a guy to call to make some business, to make some energy business, and let's focus on Iraq. That was a strategic mistake, and we have paid very heavily for that. And the same kind of low value, low morals, politics, it's always easy because you have one guy, Modi, he's suppressing the people, and then we can make business with him because he's collecting a lot of taxpayers' money from 1.4 billion people, so he can buy a lot of arms, so we can make a lot of deals with him, and it's convenient for the White House and for Berlin to make such arrangements. And so it is in a way easy, simple. And the result, of course, is extremely expensive, as we see. Now everybody, because I'm campaigning for a moral foreign politics since 20 years, now they always told me, Gunther, we are not caring for Ukraine. This is too expensive. The agricultural policy, leave it to the Russians. And now the result of our policies, it was cheap, the energy from Russia, but now the result is 500,000 people dead, and hundreds of billions of dollars of damage and costs and consequences for the global economy, which we had already to pay, and the massive reconstruction costs of Ukraine, and the massive shake-up costs for the whole global economic system because of the energy and agriculture war, where everybody in the world has to pay via the price level and contribute to that, and the massive rearmament race on the world, So this is the real cost. And when you calculate it over 25 years, it would have been much better to be strict and moral in the beginning. And the same case is with India. It's maybe convenient to have one guy in the center who suppresses the rest, and then you don't care. You don't know exactly where is Amman or some Khalistan. Many people in the world have not even heard that name before. And then they think, Gunther is inventing this case, or the Sikhs, who are the Sikhs, But in reality, they were always there. And there was always injustice in India since 1947, 49, and so on. And we just found it convenient to ignore it because it was easy to make business, and by the rest we didn't care. And that's not the way we can do foreign policy in the future. That's not the way we can build a better world. And we really must go very much to the facts and the ground. And we must believe the people when they say they are mistreating us on religious or ethnic ground. And then we cannot make business, Mr. Modi. You will not be in the UN Security Council. You will not be in the OECD, and we will not conclude a free trade agreement with you. You will have many problems in the future with us, because we will not forget that you were not with us in this terrible war. We will not forget that you were with the Russians when it was in genocidal times. And we will not forget you and forgive you that you mistreat your own population so terrible, and that you behave like a nice grandfather on the global stage. This is over now after the BRICS Summit 2023, because we've seen you dancing with Putin and with Lavrov, and they are bloody dictators, and you have disgraced yourself. And this is everybody who is now working with India is ultimately disgracing himself as well in that sense. And I condemn this 4 billion weapons deal, because these weapons we should give to Ukraine and not to India. And this is the way. And India should get not a single weapon from the West anymore, as long as they are basically buying and funding the Russian arms industry. But anyhow, Putin can do nothing with these worthless rupees, because there's so little to buy for the Russian industry in India that it's anyhow completely worthless, because the Indian economy under Modi is built on construction and services and IT exporting, but he's not manufacturing anything which the Russians can buy with the rupees. So anyhow, it is a very dark future for Mr. Modi ahead, I'm confident, because the buck stops here, and not anybody in the West will forgive him that he was not with us, but he was with Putin in this war, and time for reckoning will come.
Yeah, and I think that's a very interesting point, that actually maybe we in the West do have a lot of responsibility. The rise in these authoritarian regimes has arguably been primarily down to a weakness of leadership in the West. The US, maybe the European Union, the UK certainly. It does seem to be endemic in the West at the moment. Do you think things might change if, for example, Trump gets in, if he does get in later this year?
I'm confident Mr. Trump will not be president of the United States of America, because he is an embodiment of all the worst things which are there in America, from nationalism to other negative aspects, and I'm confident he will not be elected. It's a bit of a backslash, after we had very moral foreign policy, which led us to the victory in the Cold Wars in the 1980s, with Ronald Reagan and Maggie Thatcher. This was, of course, a major effort of our societies to be strict, to rearm, to put nuclear weapons in Europe, to really compete economically, to make these deals with China and Saudi Arabia, to reduce the energy price. And so there was a lot of efforts, and also to compete militarily in Afghanistan. This was a huge effort. And afterwards, when we won the Cold War, then of course our societies have relaxed, and said, okay, we are at peace, we don't need to work hard anymore, we can relax, we don't need to confront anybody anymore because we have won. And then, of course, we were a little bit reluctant to go into war modus again when Putin was rising. And we had this distraction in the wars in the Middle East, in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then, of course, Putin and China, they could rise to a big power status again in these moments. And we were like, okay, they export a lot of capital. That was convenient because most of our British, American, and, Trump is a very good example for that. Because Trump's rise is coming from Russian money and Kazakh money into the New York real estate, yeah? And also London was full of people who were happy to take money as advisors, consultants, and commission takers from the Soviet Union, ex-Soviet Union. And so it was a convenient moment. But now, with this big shock of 2022 and this really confrontational moment we are, and this world history defining moment we are at the moment here in February 2024, I think our Western elites will rise and societies will rise with the challenge. And they will understand. The buck stops here. We have gone so much into the appeasement camp that we have invited full-scale aggression. And if Russia wins in Ukraine, and if aggression pays off by giving land and being a big victory against our values, against our allies, and against our arms, then of course people like Modi will go big time, and they will all, or Erdogan and others, they will do the Putin full time. And of course, we now gradually start to understand that this is a big danger and very costly. So then I think our societies will gradually rise, and they will not accept this kind of deal-making, appeasement, easy way out, kind of shortcutting by buying off these authoritarian elites. And the appetite for authoritarian appeasement is going to be very slow in the next decade. So the times for Erdogan's, Modi's, Putin's and Xi's are going to be very bad in the next decade.
Yeah. I'd like, for the final section, if I may, Gunther, just to look at Khalistan specifically and look at the logistics, the basic logistics of establishing a new nation. Now, of course, new nations require huge amounts of infrastructure, whether it's the economy, the energy supply, simple things like the police force, things like that. It does require a huge amount of not just organisation, but simple hard cash. It requires resources. It needs funding. It needs to set up, for example, a central bank. From your economic perspective, your economic background and experience, do you think, I suspect it's likely that Khalistan could only happen economically with, let's call it the sponsorship of foreign money. Now that foreign money could come from all sorts of directions. Do you think the European Union would get involved financially in supporting Khalistan?
Look, this all international money will only come, state money and international financial institutions will only come after independence. After independence, obviously, there will be the World Bank, the IMF, and all the institutions helping Khalistan and all the potential other new states. Yeah? This is for the moment when the facts are created. Then, of course, the world community will help Khalistan as we have helped Croatia, Estonia, Mongolia, all the new countries. Let's not forget, the United Nations was created from 50 countries in San Francisco, and we are now at 200. The exact number is 47, and we are at 189. So, but more or less, remember, 50 to 200 in the last years since the World War II. And so new countries is nothing new for the world. We have 150 new countries in the last 80 years. And if we get 20 new from India, no problem. Yeah? We have the mechanism to handle that and to support that. Yeah? And what I want to say, on the way to the independence, obviously there will be no support. Because that's also have no illusions. Yeah? There will be no support from anybody. Yeah? So this is an internal process for India. There will be like activists like me to show you the way. That's possible. And but there will be no support from anybody in that way. When it comes to big cash, no, that's not true. Big new countries don't need, because you don't change ultimately. The physical infrastructure of the country doesn't change. Yeah? If you don't have a big war, you just basically continue like normal. There will be internal borders in India. That is the new change. That's, of course, something to be overcome in terms of having a customs union between the new states, for example, to have regional cooperation, that the new customs borders inside ex-India will not be an economic hindrance for the trade and for the people. So there must be mechanisms like this. Yeah. When it comes to the currency, I don't recommend you to do new currencies like total chaos. Yeah. Go exactly to the dollar or to the euro or peg your new currency to that. Yeah. Don't invent the wheel new. It's not necessary. Just, be decent and find a role model of a new state which you like. For example, Croatia. It's very beautiful. Khalistan, I think, it should be the Croatia of India. And then, for example, you go with a delegation to Croatia, you see what they have done and how it worked, and there was also war in the beginning. Then they have liberated the country, then they rebuilt it, then they united it, they integrated it in NATO and in the EU. And this is the way to find one role model of a new state and to go ahead and tell everybody, we will be the Croatia of India. Please support our independence. We will be a peaceful country. We will be a good, harmonious partner of our neighbors in India and the continent and in the world community. And this way you can convince everybody to be acceptable and welcome member in the world community of free nations.
I mean, there's no doubt that the state of Khalistan will be based upon democratic principles. Its values will definitely echo those of Western democracies. Do you think then that, based on that it is very likely that the European Union would be very receptive and very generous in terms of trade agreements, support? Do you think military support could come from NATO, or not support, protection, let's call it? I assume NATO would not absorb Khalistan within NATO, but certainly would there be some form of alliance with Western nations?
Look, it's always like this. We look at the recent example of ex-Yugoslavia and ex-Soviet Union. The European Union, the UK and the United States will be always very skeptical and oppose new independent nations. That's for sure. So don't expect any welcome from any of Washington, Brussels or London. It will not happen. And then once you are independent, they will come to your capitals and then they will conclude trade agreements and they will support the reconstruction. But the decisions about independence, this has to happen in Khalistan and in India, because it's not our task to break up our nations. It's not what any world leader will engage in. It is basically a decision which the process must be made in the ex-Indian continent. And once you create the facts, we will all welcome you and we will help you also to settle border conflicts and to stay peaceful among each other. Absolutely. There will be also the opportunity, the opportunity to have agreements with, of course, trade agreements, security agreements, to integrate you in OECD and in OSZE and all these mechanisms I foresee very, very clearly. That's logical. And also in the UN, first of all, that will be all welcoming, and in the IMF and in the World Bank, yes, absolutely. But only once independence is achieved and recognition is achieved. So this is the first step. You must make an alliance with other potential breakaway regions in India and form a process for a peaceful dissolution of India into ex-India, and also make an agreement with them how you will do an Indian union out of the Indian Empire, and then how to have a security agreement for a peaceful dissolution of ex-India, and that will be the way forward.
Very encouraging and positive message. Gunther Fehlinger, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation. All the best, and please, let's be very friendly and let's work together for a better world. And please support Ukraine.
Indeed. You've been watching a Satluj TV News Special. I'm Angus Scott in London.